All right, we are live. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I have once again on the channel the marvelous Janny Wurts, who is the author of The War of Light and Shadow and To Ride Hell's Chasm and a lot of other incredible books that I'm excited to get to in the future. Janny, thank you for joining me again.
It's a privilege to be here for a second round. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It was so funny because I talked about this with you a little on Twitter before we went live, that that first kind of interview is so fun because you're getting to meet the person and you're getting to like kind of dig into the basics of their writing process a little bit. And for this one, I was really looking forward to us just being able to talk about writing and just kind of digging in a little bit and having a kind of an extension of the Twitter conversations we always have about different books and writing. So I kind of want to bring in what we were just chatting about, because I actually think that that's a really interesting topic that, you know, there's been a lot of videos on YouTube recently about pacing and about prose and all that kind of stuff. And we just were talking about kind of people's readers' expectations in epic fantasy. And I would love to kind of recap a little bit of that, because I think that the chat would find that very interesting.
Well, they all have them.
Oh yeah, we all do. But kind of what people's expectations sometimes are going into epic fantasy, and especially for writers like us who tend to want to kind of really dig in those first installments of the series and kind of put in some work before we get all the big things that I think sometimes happen right away in series. So for you, like, when you're writing these epic fantasy series, what do you hope a reader takes out of those first couple of books?
It isn't going to be about what I hope, because a book is what you write, and then it's the reader's interpretation of the words. Mm-hmm. So the reader is going to walk away with a completely different experience, and it will be entirely colored by what they bring to it. All of their life's experience, all of the triggers, all of the thoughts that are stimulated, all of the meanings that they derive from a word. Mm-hmm. And so I don't take reader expectations or reader reactions seriously, because it honestly isn't about me. Mm-hmm. It's not even, only to some degree is it about the words on the page. That's just the catalyst. Mm-hmm. How they react to that catalyst is all them.
Right.
So their expectations, their response, what they take away from it is their life experience. And there is absolutely no way I can steer that, nor would I want to try.
Right.
So when you mentioned reader expectations, and tying back to the discussion we had for the few minutes before we went live, we were briefly touching on short stories, novels, and long form work, which would be an epic. Mm-hmm. And that to understand the different forms, you have to approach the read in a different way.
Yeah.
Because in a short story, there's absolutely no wasted space. Mm-hmm. Everything has to count. And there's no wasted space in a long form work either. It's mm-hmm. just a long form work is going to develop at a different pace.
Right.
And you cannot expect to judge an entire long form work out of book one. I mean, the bombshell smashing, crashing one that I always say people overjudge or underjudge is Thomas Covenant. Because they hit that page, whatever, where that rape happens, and they go off the deep end and they think they know everything about what that book is about. And it's like, mm-hmm. wait a minute. You just missed the whole point mm-hmm. of the entire long form work, which doesn't fully deliver until 2 trilogies down the pike.
Right.
And when Donaldson wrote his own essays about what he was writing about how we look at our store of subconscious and unconscious and conscious minds, and we pluck out the ugly things far more readily than the beautiful things. And we mm-hmm. focus on the mistakes, the failures. So he wrote a character that totally did that. Mm-hmm. Lived that, did that, colored every expectation, colored every reaction. And yeah, he's miserable to write. And he's surrounded by this land that is just outrageously beautiful, by mm-hmm. characters that are outrageously honorable and wonderful. people miss the entire point of that book, which is, this is what happens to you when you focus on the negative, or this is what happens when you live the negative side of yourself and you disown the positive side. So he had this man with a disease who thought he was going into a world that didn't exist. He thought he was in dreamland. His whole life in the real world was completely, everything was gone. His job, his marriage, his self-esteem, his virility, all of it. And he's dumped into this beautiful side of the unconscious mind. And he can't relate, and so makes massively grievous mistakes and then dwells on them.
Right.
And there is a redemption, but this is a beautifully crafted, literate, expansive, deep look at human consciousness. But people hit that one little thing and they bounce off it like a little skipping stone over a lake. And I don't blame people. If you're triggered by that, don't read the book. But to condemn the entire work of literature based on a reaction that has nothing to do or little to do and everything to do, because Donaldson took the most egregious thing that this character could do and then wallowed in it.
Yeah.
Until the moment where it became a triumph.
Right.
That character redeems. So it's a hard read as a redemption arc. It's a miserable character, but it's a long form work. There's a purpose to what this author was doing, and it's an incredible purpose. And the modern reader tends to write it off according to some very superficial things, which are not superficial at all to the modern sociological fabric.
Yeah.
But I still maintain Thomas Covenant is a great work of fantasy that doesn't deserve to be panned, because that's exactly how that author wanted you to respond to that scene. He took you down in the mud, and he wanted that so that you would get dragged with Covenant and you would struggle to even see the beauty around you too. And the whole point of it was, why do we disregard the beautiful parts of ourselves, the beautiful parts of our world, the beautiful parts of our psychological makeup? And why do we overweight the ugly?
Yeah.
Is it a survival trait? Is it a martyr trait? Is it are we preconditioned to think we have to be perfect? And so we stick in, how many writers do you know who concentrate on their successes and don't lament over their 1-star reviews? And which do they put more time into? Okay.
Yep.
Instead of bitch for an hour, throw it off and keep going. Because honestly, what's more important?
Right. Yeah. Well,
the number of people that you touched or the number of people you pissed off? If you're a good writer, I think you do both.
Right. Well,
it
was funny because when I talked to Fonda Lee earlier this week, one of the things she made the comment of is, when you have a character that is very divisive, that people can't decide how they feel about them, you've done something right. Right. You've got all these different sides of discourse about the same character. And I was asked recently about how I handle like the 1-star reviews and the criticisms and things like that. And honestly, like, I'd be lying if I said that they didn't affect me at all, because I'm human, right? But at the same time, I'm not writing for them. Like, it's okay if it didn't work and they bounce off it and they didn't like it for whatever reason. That's okay.
Let me tell you something.
For the people that love it.
I went to Russia. I went to the Soviet Union in 1976, just after Nixon opened Soviet Union and Westerners could actually go to that country. And I went there to see paintings. It was a transformative experience.
I bet.
Because this is an authoritarian regime who decides who gets to be educated, who gets to be an artist, who gets to be taught how. There is no competition. There is no clamoring for your attention. You're literally dictated to everything.
Right.
You go into the supermarket, 2 companies make the labels on the cans. The colors, so there's no advertising, nothing to grab your attention. It's absolutely numbing. It's like having Novocaine shot into we live in a noisy culture, but we have choice.
Right.
So when I say, how do you care how your writing is being received? You can't, because do you want to be talking to yourself all the time?
Right.
Without that abrasiveness, without those differences, without those people who hate your stuff. My God, we live on a planet with how many billions of people? There are enough people who are going to like what you do. So why are you worried about the ones who don't?
Right.
You can't worry about the ones who don't.
Yep. Yeah.
And that will freeze your writing up. You know, I see new writers all the time going on the internet saying, what do readers hate the most about this or that in epic fantasy? And it's like, why are you even asking? You think you can please everybody? That is the straight route to mediocrity.
And insanity.
No, just plain mediocrity, because you've got no edges, nothing to cut with, nothing to spark. Not everybody likes it, or everybody is somewhat indifferent to it, and you haven't stirred up any controversy.
Right.
Get out of here. You haven't accomplished anything.
Yeah.
If you don't have enemies, you haven't lived.
Right. I want to make sure that I'm not missing any questions in the chat as we're talking. Hello, everybody.
If we were meant to all be the same, we would be amoebas. Right? All the same.
Early in the morning, I am usually. So later in the day, I start to become more human. Hello, everybody. Zin says, I've read Grand Conspiracy, waiting for Philip and company to discuss that before I read Peril's Gate. Nice. That's Grand Conspiracy is book 2?
Depends if you have the U.S. hardbacks or if you have, it is the second book in the third arc, which is 5 books long.
Okay.
The first arc, if you have the U.S. hardback printing, is 2 books.
Okay.
Because Warhost and Ships are supposed to be one story. And in fact, arc 5 or arc 3, 5 books is supposed to be one story too. It's just nice and neatly diced up into phases so that you get a climax. So yeah, Peril's Gate, if you're stuck waiting for them, starts literally 5 minutes later. So don't wait for them. Just read it.
Not much of a time jump.
No, not in that case. Not in that case. But I don't need to go, because probably a lot of people listening to this won't have read it. And it's not about my work anyhow. It's about writing in general. So, you know, I would always encourage people, read at the speed you want. Don't wait for somebody else. Write at the speed you want. Don't wait for anybody else, you know, because otherwise you'll die with a lot of stories not written.
Amen to that. Well, I mean, we were talking about that beforehand too, where like talking about how each book writes very differently. And sometimes it takes a lot of time. Like sometimes people don't realize how much time it takes to reach actually writing down on a piece of paper a certain story. Because you said The Gallant, you said, was the one that took you 10 years?
10 years.
Yeah.
10 years. I wrote the first section of it very quickly. And then I wrote the second section of it fairly fast. And then it sat there for a long time because I had to do a lot of homework to set the time. And then I had to pick out which intersectional things, how did these intersectional things that were happening around this story, how did they bear on it? And which things did I show and not show to make it not be unwieldy? So, and the mix didn't come out exactly right until it was right. So people don't realize creativity waxes and wanes. There'll be periods in your life where it just flows and you can't stop it happening. Hell's Chasm wrote so fast. I was literally going to bed still writing, and I was getting up in the morning still writing, and there were notes all over everybody. My husband hated me because I was going all day, and then it was still going when I was quitting. I couldn't stop that book.
Yeah.
Other books, it's like ripping nails out of old oak, and you skin your knuckles and you pound your brain and you backtrack and you stop and you pause and you stare at the wall and you break things. And the trick is, can the reader tell when you're done? If you've done your job, the reader will not know if it was a hard write or an easy write. And I can tell you which books I wrote that were absolutely horrible to write, but you can't tell. So I think some people, when they hit that sweet spot, don't realize that this isn't going to be every book. And then they get horribly discouraged and they think they've lost it, and they think that, and it's just not that way. Yeah. There's so many things go into creativity and working with your creative muse or your inner consciousness, whatever it is that you're trusting to fill in the gaps. And sometimes the radio reception is good and sometimes it's freaking full of static. And you got to pick it out of the mud.
Yep.
And the
Yep.
trick is, if you write even a paragraph, you're one paragraph closer to the finish. If you write even a page, you're one paragraph closer. If you get nothing else but a half a sentence,
Yep.
or nothing else but I stared at the wall today and I ended up having to take a walk,
Right.
you will get there.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you will not get there is if you step off the track and quit.
Right. Yeah.
So I think preparing the people that are just starting in, that not every book is going to go easily.
Yep. Yeah.
That's just the way it is. The professional doesn't complain about it. They tell their editor, I'm running behind.
Yep.
And you say exactly what page you're on, and you say, I'm still producing. It will get there. It just, some books take longer than others.
Yeah.
Tolkien took 18 years to write The Lord of the Rings, and those books are pretty short when you split them down.
Mm-hmm.
So what's this thing about suddenly Rome has to be built in a day?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, like we have, we've kind of touched on this before in conversation, where different stages of your life, you're going to have very different creativity wells, right? Like, I have kind of just come back to writing and having enough creative juice to write something like these, because I was in college, and then I got married, and then I had kids, and I was a mom of 3 young kids for a while, and I had almost no creative fuel to run on, because I was pouring all that creative energy into very young children. And now, for the first time, that's, in the last few years, it's starting to kind of come back a little bit. So I'm definitely seeing the hills and the valleys already with that. So I'm trying to just take it all as it comes.
We're just keeping the little rat from stepping on the keyboard and cutting us off.
Typing a message.
Well, part of the way I don't get sore sitting at the chair is the keyboard's really close to the edge of the desk.
Mm-hmm.
And if the cat puts a foot long, they'll dim my screen, they'll knock the volume down, they'll do, so yeah, you little rat, you can't step on the keyboard. I know, I'm sorry, you want to jump up here and eat, but it's not dinner time yet, and the husband's got to feed you. So yeah, she's walking off sulking.
Oh. Yeah, this is a very cat-friendly channel. My cats jump up on my lap all the time when I'm on live streams. So, yeah, that's
well, no, she's coming in to step on the keyboard to tell me it's coming up on dinner time, right? Mm-hmm. Husband's going to feed her, so
it's time.
Oh, don't do that! Look at her! Look at her! She's going to kick that painting right on the floor.
What is her name?
Stardust.
Cute.
She's got a little dust on her nose, a little tiny thin white line.
She's definitely looking for some attention, for sure. She's a rescue. Brian says, excellent advice for any creative endeavor, not just writing. PL, hi PL. Please don't stop writing anytime soon, Janny. The world needs your work.
If I haven't quit by now, I'll have to be dead.
There was a couple of questions I wanted to ask you that were from the chat. Nico showed up and could tell right away we were talking about Thomas Covenant. Anita
not for the weak of heart, but
for sure.
Definitely a meritorious work. So anyway, yeah, questions that you came up from a chat, which I don't remember what chat, but that's okay.
Oh, from the chat with everybody putting their comments in. So Anita just has a question of, how do you manage your time with everything that you do?
By not managing it.
Same.
Well, no, I think that some people are super regimented, but creativity isn't. Mm-hmm. And so, do I work every day? Yes. Do I care if I get something done every day? As long as I sat down to try. Some days just don't work at all. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big believer in learning how to hear your own impulses. Mm. So if I sit down to write and it's just not working, and there's a book I want to pick up and read, or gee, this magazine article snagged my attention, or this piece of research, or this rabbit hole, or this interest suddenly snagged my attention, I think that's just your inner self pulling the string saying, hey, there's something here for you. And the numbers of times where I've gone and done something totally disrelated, and I thought I'm just wasting time, and I'm not, but I ended up using that. Mm-hmm. I ended up using that, So go down those little rabbit holes. Read that interesting article on brain tanning. It could shape an entire scene, which it did.
Right.
I mean, you know, I can tell you the number of times that I went down a rabbit hole or chased an interest where did this hobby come from? I don't even know why I picked it up. But those inner impulses, they always know what they're doing. Now, this won't work for everybody. If you're a procrastinator, then there's a difference between a procrastination and an impulse. And let me try to define that. Procrastination happens because you have a value crisis. You don't think what you're creating is as important as something else. Or you think it doesn't mean that much, so therefore anything else is more important than that. So you're going to clean the house, you're going to call a friend that you didn't call in 100 years, you're going to do any other thing because what you're doing has no value. It's a value crisis because you don't believe your work has enough merit to take precedence. Sometimes your work shouldn't take precedence. Sometimes that's your real life saying, take care of your sick relative or your sick kid. But if you're a continuous procrastinator or you spend a long time messing around and you just can't seem to focus, it's usually a value crisis because something convinced you, your dumb little inner voice said, you don't believe that what you're doing is important. So you're putting every other garbage thing in front of it first. So the question is, why don't you think it's important?
Right.
And usually that's an inner self crisis where you talked yourself out of believing that you mattered. And since when didn't you matter? Look out the window. Every single bird out there knows that it matters. Why do you have less mattering than a squirrel or a bird or a roach or a bug? They know what they're doing. They were given a life and they live it.
Yeah.
But human beings get all tangled up in what other human beings tell them. And unfortunately, we listen.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a big advocate for the two sides of, there's obviously more than this, but two main sides of creative process being input and output, right? So we're outputting all of this creativity in our writing. And I think a lot of authors don't spend the time to, like you said, follow those impulses to put the creative input back in, that we kind of focus all on, no, I got to get this book done. I got to sit in front of my, blank page and I have to force myself through it, even though my creative energy is giving me kind of some red flags that I might need to take a moment to do something else to recharge. And I'm a big believer in how important that is, because you're going to burn out real quick if you don't have that input coming back in.
Yeah, but it's hard sometimes to put down the pen.
Oh, for sure.
And make it happen.
Oh, if you're in flow, go for it.
Oh, yeah. But I'm saying sometimes it's hard to give up the grip.
Yeah. Yep.
Of bearing down. And sometimes it helps to have a really big hobby. I've always said, if you sit down at the keyboard all day and you take little tiny ideas and you're blowing them up into a full-blown world with full-blown characters, with full-blown reactions, with full-blown passions, everything, sometimes you need to step out of that and you need to handle something big like a horse where all you can do is react.
Right.
You're not in charge anymore. You're interpreting minute to minute to minute what this 1,000-pound animal is doing underneath of you. And so it's a different kind of connection. So sometimes I will reach for something big that all I can do is shut down and listen. So hobbies that make you do that.
Yeah.
And an animal, you can't just turn the key and walk away.
Right. Yeah. Horses are a very, they were very, and I know they have been for you too. Horses have been a very formative experience for me in life, and in how I approach concepts like respect and just, being aware of what's going on around me. And it's amazing the lessons that you learn from riding a very large animal.
Or just your cat.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to take the life terms on the cat's terms. You can't dictate to them. I've always said every child should have a kitten. So that will teach them to respect an animal faster than anything else.
Yep. Our kitten, he's something else.
Yep. And if the kids are overbearing with the kitten, it ain't having it.
Yep.
It will put them in their place real quick, either by not interacting with them, it'll walk away, or it will give them a good rip.
Yep. Britain wants to know, who are some concurrent fantasy authors that have had an impact on you, Janny? Or are you one of the fantasy authors who doesn't read fantasy anymore? Well, I know she still reads fantasy.
Are you kidding me? I'm not one of these authors who doesn't read anymore. I constantly read. What concurrent authors have had impact on me? That's a really hard question. Because I've read so many books at this point. I'm a hard customer to please in that regard. The other thing is, I didn't start in fantasy and science fiction. I started reading mainstream hardback fiction, not popular fiction paperbacks. I'm talking library books. So Thomas Costain and Dorothy Dunnett and just monumental Three Musketeers, Dumas, all of the books that were hardback in the library, where mass market paperbacks were a secondary thing. The hardback was the big issue. Right. And so my foundational reading, if I was to say what books impacted me hard, The Horseman by Joseph Kessel, and I'm not talking about the movie. Summer of the Red Wolf by Marcel West, about a guy going through a midlife crisis and an explosive interaction with another character that just, I've never read a book that peeled my skin like that and caused me to reassess my impact on other people. It was just powerful read, and it's not like his other thrillers. I read all my father's books. I read all of my books from the school library. Quickly, I grew out of them. I went to the main library. So what books influenced me? Formative ones, way back to Roger Zelazny. Lord of the Rings taught me that you could make your own world, because up to that time, fantasy was really relegated to mythology and fairy tales.
Right.
Or go read the Eddas, or go read. So that was monumental in that it said, you don't like the mythology, make your own.
Yeah.
So, I'd read Marion Renault, Bull from the Sea, and the Theseus, and her Alexander, and her Mary Stewart's Crystal Cave was the closest I came to fantasy.
Yeah.
So when I say what books influenced me, I'm drawing off a very wide reach. Dick Francis for mysteries. Boy, build a character, punch you in the gut, use very, 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 very focused prose, and still carry the impact of what some writers take thousands of pages to do. Brilliant, brilliant writer. So the list of my influences are probably going to run a little far afield than many fantasy readers have read. I don't know.
Yeah. But how important is it for us, do you think, as fantasy writers, to read outside our genre?
I don't know, because I'm not you.
Yeah.
So, the route I took isn't the only route. There's a million ways to skin a cat. Some people, you pointed out, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein at 16 years old. What the heck could she have written or read up until then? Even had access to, when books were a rare thing to access at that time period. So don't go read Dickens or any of that if you don't like it. Don't go read stuff if you don't like it. But find something that does reach deep. Find something that does stretch you out. Find something that pushes your limits. So where's the fantasy that pushes my limits these days? Frankly, P.L. Stewart's Drowned Kingdom. He hits all the buttons that just piss you off. You want to hate this character so badly because all the things that really make you mad about society, but then he'll put just enough into that character to make you see the humanity. Right. And it's an aggravating read in spots, but it's also, there's an uninhibitedness to the way that he presents that.
Right.
And I can admire that. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Empire in Black and Gold. Brilliant, brilliant world building. And he managed to have characters that I could feel for. And they were complex. And they weren't all lovable. And they weren't all sweet. And they grew and they changed. And they killed themselves off. God damn it. I have scars from that. So, you can learn from every writer. Madar's work, Crystal Madar, who wrote Legacy of the Brightwash. What an aggravating read, but what a really brilliant depiction of a society and a dystopia and a blowing up of a small point. You know, she takes children literally and does horrible things, and that is the power this society runs on.
Right.
Well, how is that different than our society destroying its planet for energy? And yet people don't feel it. She made you feel it in that book. And she made you outraged and angry to the point where I read that book and I said, I wish people would get as outraged and angry over the atrocities that are going on, where our society is literally feeding on itself and ripping apart the structure that supports everything,
Yeah.
not just human centric. So what books have influenced me? I see it in all different corners. When I read your book, Phased, you wrote a relationship between two sisters that is so far outside of my experience that it made me really look at that relationship as being different than what I experienced, and it made me see things in a different way. So to a greater degree and a lesser degree, every single moment that I live my life influences work. So don't take it from me what you could be doing. Could be, not should be. I hate the word should. Could be is the much kinder word. Find what blows your dress up.
Yeah.
And you'll know, because that'll be the one thing that everybody calls your evil little sinful thing that you do to waste
The guilty
time.
pleasure.
Yes,
Yeah.
your guilty pleasure. That's going to be where your gold mine is. So dig into it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What are you avoiding and what are you finding? You know, the two sides of that coin are going to tell you everything.
Yeah. So when you're reading, and I know it, you know, for me at least, reading and writing is kind of two sides of the same coin, you know, and do you find that you're taking off the writer hat when you read, or are you reading it as a writer and appreciating what the author is doing within the story, or are you just reading the story and being like kind of leaning more toward the reader side?
I try not to wear my writer hat when I'm reading because that's going to throw a whole different perspective over top of what that person is writing.
Right.
I try to take what words are on the page and interpret the prose that they've written as cleanly and as clearly as I can, given that a book is no longer the writer's experience. It's now my experience with that book.
Right.
So do I ever put on the writer hat when I'm reading something? Only if the writing or the prose on that page stops me cold.
Yeah.
Either because it's so incomprehensibly off the wall that it doesn't work, and so it threw me out of the story because it doesn't work, or it was so damn brilliant that I went, wow. And you know, the day I pick up a book and I don't see something like that, I give up, because you never know everything. What do you do if you don't have a mentor? What do you do if nothing impresses you anymore? What do you do if nothing wows you? What if you say, my God, that person just did something so brilliant, I could never touch it. What's going to stretch you to reach bigger in your own work if you think that everything else is now just, they're your equal peers? They're never.
Right.
So I always hope for that book that's going to open that channel of, holy crap, that author just wrote me into the ground.
Yeah.
Give me that book.
Yeah. I love getting to a book where I have to pause and just, you know, you've got your reader hat on, but the writer hat, like you says, comes out for me too in those moments where I'm just like, wow, I wish I had written something with
Usually,
that kind of
I'll
impact.
hit that usually at the end. Yeah, it'll usually be at the end of the book.
Yeah.
Not during the experience, unless the prose level is just so off the scale into something that I could admire. Very seldom do I get blown off the page, but it usually happens at the end of the book and I go, holy crap, what did I just read?
Yeah.
And give me those books, because I don't like to keep reading stuff that's the same old, same old, same old, or where all the edges are sanded off, or where all the, give me the book that's going to make me mad. Give me the book that's going to move me. Give me the book that's going to make me scream because I didn't like where you ended it.
Right.
Give me the book that's going to get under my skin and actually make me roar.
Right. Yeah.
Because too much of our lives is consists of the internet, where you're tuning out things. I don't want books to be tuned out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also, I really appreciate the books, and I've read a lot of books where I read it and I have a good experience with it, and then I move on. And, I love the books that stay with you, the ones that you can tell kind of sit with you months after you've finished reading it. And that it's almost like, in thinking about it later, it continues to expand after you've closed the last page in your mind.
That is a book. And that is a book. And that's why I can never do any top 10 lists for anything. Because the first criterion is, did I remember the ending 20 years later? Is it still bothering me, or is it still turning over my thought, or does it still choke me up, or does it still? And that list of books gets bigger and bigger and bigger as your life goes on. It's real easy to make a top 10 list when you're in your 20s, but try it when you're 40, try it when you're 50, try it when you're 60. Because every book is unique in that way.
Right.
And my pile of books that left that kind of impression has gotten pretty tall right now.
Yeah. Well, and as readers, if we're continually growing, and I mean, I feel like I learned so much about myself as a reader last year, because I read books that I know 3 or 4 years ago, even, I might have put down and not liked. But the being around the community and continuing to grow and expand my appreciation for different styles and modes of storytelling. I know Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. I would not have enjoyed that probably 5 years ago. And now I loved it last year. And it's a very different style than what I used to constantly look for and want. And so that appreciation just consistently expanding the more you read and the further into life you get and the more experience you have with it. It's amazing how many different types of stories you can enjoy that way.
It changes. What satisfied you doesn't now, because your life perspective is different. We were talking about decision making. Decision making when you don't know anything is really easy. It's black and white. Do this. That's the right thing to do. But the more you go through life, the more complex it gets, until you reach, like what we were talking about, that wall. Or suddenly you realize you don't know enough to make a decision about much of anything.
Right.
You're always running on limited data. And you go through that paralytic period where you realize that you're ignorant about everything. How can you make any choices until you get through the other side of it and you go, you can't pause here. You have to make the choice based on the data you have, and you have to face the fact that you're going to be wrong. Sometime or other, you're going to wake up to the fact that you didn't have enough data to make that choice, but you have to act where you're at. That's about being conscious.
Right.
And that's about growing. That's about expanding.
Yeah.
So decisions get harder. Books get more complex. Things that you read now for escape would have been on your top 10 list when you were 16.
Right.
And sometimes that book that was on your top 10 list at 16, the Suck Fairy got it, as Joanne puts it, and you can't read it anymore because it's not where your mind is anymore.
Yeah.
You can't look at life that simply anymore. And you realize how much your imagination supplied on the page that wasn't even there.
Right. Yeah. Because again, that going back to the reader bringing in their experience into the book, and now it's moved from the author's realm into the reader.
I remember my parents reading to me all the Mowgli stories by Rudyard Kipling when I was a little kid. And those stories were magic.
Yeah.
They were just amazing. And I tried to read, because I have a beautiful edition of that book, to my husband's niece when she was having insomnia. And she was, about 12? And I couldn't get past 3 paragraphs. It was so full of moralizing. It was absolutely horrible. It was all moralizing. I don't want to go into the push button things, but you read it with a modern mind in this day and age at my age, and I go, I can't get through this. I can't even feed this to this kid.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Mm.
It's absolutely totally goes against my grain. And I go, why did I love these stories? It was all about the animals. It was all about the
Yeah.
jungle. It was
Yeah.
all about the idea of living wild with no parental oversight.
Yep.
It was all about being able to talk to Bagheera. It was all
Mhm.
about everything that was magical about being in the woods. But how much of that was actually on the page? Trust me, go look at the book. Very, very, very little.
Yeah.
So many times you'll revisit a classic that you enjoyed as a little child, and you realize you brought all the wonder of childhood to that.
Right.
And the book didn't have it in there at all.
Right. It was all the filling in of your imagination.
And if you read what the animals are saying to Mowgli, it isn't even, the magic isn't what I remember, okay?
Right.
It was all about being a kid living in the woods running wild. That was everything about
Yeah.
that book.
Yeah.
Being a 6-year-old kid and being able to live in the jungle and talk to animals. It was like, cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I devoured horse books when I was younger. I mean, and I started with like, you know, The Black Stallion by Walter Farley and a lot of the kind of classic horse series. And I read, you know, all of the Popcorn, Pony Pals, Stable Club, etc. things in the library. And I know if I went back to those now.
Well, for one thing, Walter Farley never touched a horse. And that's dead obvious.
Which I would probably notice a lot more now.
I need to probably put Walter Farley in my acknowledgments, because if it weren't for Walter Farley, I would have been a non-reader. I am serious. I am serious. My parents read to me when we were very young, and I listened to Treasure Island, and I listened to Robert Louis Stevenson's Robinson Crusoe and the Mowgli stories. They were being read by my father to my brothers. And I listened in.
Yeah.
When it came time to learn to read in first grade, first of all, my parents refused to teach me anything. I wanted to read ahead of school, and they wouldn't have it. They said, you're going to learn this in school. And that was horribly frustrating, you know, to watch them reading papers and I couldn't understand what was on the page.
Yeah.
It made me very angry. So I was going to be a non-reader because the stuff they were using to teach people to read was so dry and so boring and so awful. I tuned right out. It was just too dull, too slow, too completely horrible. Forget it. I'd rather be out in the woods, building dams in the stream, doing all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was totally going to be a non-reader. I was on a set course of it until third grade. And then I snuck into my brother's bedroom and stole The Black Stallion. And it was over. And then I had a fight with my school teachers because they would not allow me to take the books out of the teen section because I was too young. You can't do this. You can't go into the teen section as a second grader? Can't do it. So I had to go after school with parental consent. And so I ripped through all of that stuff. And then it was off from Walter Farley. It was straight into the big stuff.
Yeah.
I got handed The Agony and the Ecstasy when I was in 7th grade. And what was it? One of my high school teachers handed me Deliverance. Are you kidding me? And I came back into her and I said, do you know what you just made me read? And she said, oh, I didn't think of that. I thought I was handing you a camping story. It's all male sexual. Anyway. So yeah, and they get murdered, or they murder the guy anyway. So yeah, I was straight off the deep end into the big stuff from Walter Farley. So I owe it to Walter Farley. But yeah, don't go back and read it because he never touched a horse, and it's obvious.
Yeah, which is funny because I think I want to say the last time I read one was probably 10 or 11. So yeah, it would be interesting.
Black Beauty reads better when you're older.
Oh yeah, that's also I've read that one with my kids.
Yeah, talk about a book having impact. My God.
Oh, so it's so
she
good.
Changed society. No, she seriously changed society.
It's so good
with that story. It's really, really well done.
Yeah.
So Influential books, you're starting to see the list and they span the gamut.
Yeah, absolutely.
They totally do. But yeah, I almost became a non-reader and it was really a close call.
Yeah. Walter Farley was a big one. My parents read, the Little House on the Prairie series. My grandfather actually read me Robinson Crusoe when I was pretty young. And that, talking about adding the kids' imagination to a story, that was all about the survival aspect and the building the fort and
That tree house, the tree house.
Yes, absolutely, the tree house. And I remember going out in the woods after, and I would just try to climb up in trees and nail boards to the, because I was doing my own.
Yeah, it's insidious. Story. You can't go back and read that now because the racism is absolutely awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's revolting.
Yeah.
So anyway, old books, old classics, old non-classics, old trash books. I used to read Frank Yerby. I read everything. I read everything I could get my hands on, but not in the order you were supposed to.
Right. Yeah. For everybody that wanted to see Pippin, here he is. He's now letting me know that it is time for him to eat. And to answer your question, Ida, yes, I did read Heartland by Lauren Brooke. I read that whole series. Yep. Have a good rest of your day, PL. There was another, Drew wants to know, if I may ask, how active are you on social media, and do you think it is a benefit or detriment to authors today?
It's a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. Absolutely a double-edged sword. Unfortunately, I remember the time when traditional publishing was king and writers sat home and they wrote. That is all they did. The publisher did everything. Else. Mm-hmm. You did your proofread, you did your galley read, you did your edit, but pretty much you sat home and you wrote. And the marketing and the publicity, it was all handled. And you didn't worry about that stuff. So is it a benefit if your publisher is slacking or if you have to keep your name out there? It can be a benefit, but it needs to be used wisely. Is it a detriment? Yep, because you get everybody's opinion right in your face all the time, including up to seeing every complaint review, every spat over useless stuff. I mean, I watched the latest round of internet controversy over
the latest hours. Yeah.
No, the latest internet. Oh my God, how can people do this? And it's like so empty. Why waste your writing on that? Why waste your opinion on that? There's a number of people in this world. I'm sorry to say it, but 1% of the people to 4% of the people read 100% of the books. So why are you worried about the guys who just chew on the covers?
Right. Yeah.
So getting outraged because they won't read a prologue or whatever, don't. So that's where social media can really harm you. And it can also discourage people that are fragile.
Yeah.
Because frankly, if you ever put an idea out there, there's going to be somebody going to detract it. There's going to be somebody that's going to tell you, come back to the pack, be safe with us. Don't go out there and have an opinion on your own. That's dangerous. And it threatens me because I'm safe in the pack and I've safely put a blanket around all of my opinions. So you have to do this too. And those voices can be particularly loud because those people don't have a life and they're living on social media. And also, a good chunk of them are bots.
Yep.
Sorry, but they're just feeling around to see what's going to trigger you. And when it triggers you, they figure out how to use that psychologically against you. And then they use that how to manipulate the algorithm. And the next thing you know, they have a big box of people who are triggered by this and they know exactly what to do to wreck your day.
Right.
So a lot of these people aren't real. A lot of them aren't people at all. And if they are they 6? Are they 16? Are they 8? Are they 80? Are they drunk? Did they have a bad day and they're just taking it out on you? So it's like, why do you treat this thing like it's the Holy Grail? You pick your community very carefully and you draw a very firm line, I would say, to writers who are looking at social media as to what you trust the world to see and what is yours.
Right.
And you don't just spill it all out there because first of all, the data crunchers are going to use it. You're giving away your life for free.
Yeah.
So I love social media for the fact I can connect to people like Tori. I love the social media because it enables me to reach out both with books I love to get other people to read them that may not have heard of them, and also to get my work placed to the correct readership, not to the
Right.
ones who are going to bounce off it because they want something to quick read it fast. My work's not going to work for them.
Right.
So I like social media because it enables me to be seen without the publisher's machine doing anything. And it's
Yeah.
essential if you're going to take off and do your self-pub.
Yeah.
But I think I see a lot of abuse and a lot of people who don't understand how to use it wisely. Because the sad thing is, back in the days of print media, you could make a really awful mistake and make a comment at a convention and only a small number of people would hear it, and then they would forget about it. But now you drop a bad comment on social media and it follows you forever.
Forever.
You're
Yep.
apologizing it forever. You say the wrong thing in an interview, it's on there forever. And there's a very, very tight-fisted group of people on the internet who absolutely will not let you forget that. They won't forgive it. They won't forget it. And they'll pour water on your parade. So what do you do when you're young and stupid and you don't know how to mind what you're saying or doing? So there's big detriments to social media. It's cruel, and it's also wonderful. There's days it's pulled me out of a deep, deep angst, and there's days where it's absolutely pissed me off so bad. I said, I'm taking my notebook outdoors and I'll write on the terrace.
Yep.
I don't need this garbage.
Just go out in nature.
So
yeah.
It's like anything else. But if I had to say, is it overall good or overall bad? I think a lot of the people who don't have a life use it to death. And so it's very hard. You really have to sort.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a good point about curating, because, you know, when I came on Twitter, I was very nervous to be on Twitter when I first, joined it, because I knew that it was, fairly volatile social media platform at times. But over the time that I've been on it, yeah, I obviously see all of the drama and things that happen on the side. But like you said, too, it allows me to curate a inner circle and a village that is supportive, and it is the people that I want to be around, and it is the people who use it for the same reasons that I do, and look at it as a way to build relationships. But it is something you have to actively curate to get to that point, for sure.
My rule of thumb on anything with the internet, any new platform, any new, lurk it for 3 months. So you understand the community that you're looking at before you jump in and start commenting. So YouTube, I listen to a lot of you guys' videos. I don't sign in and I don't comment. I'm very careful because I'm still figuring out who the community is.
Right.
And what the currents are and what the tides are and who likes who and who has. When you get a feel for the community and then you finally do break your silence, you're going to fit in, and you're not going to do something that's going to jar the regular customers there.
Right.
But that's hard to do, is to spend 3 months and lurk a community
Right.
before you jump in.
Yeah.
And it has to be done. The only way I survived, frankly, was by lurking and figuring out things and figuring out where I could contribute something positive and where I'm just not going to go there.
Right. And giving yourself the time to figure out, because even if you look at BookTube as a platform, there's so many different niches of BookTube, and places where you will fit in perfectly, and some places where you're going to feel like a fish out of water. And how do you know? I mean, there's so many BookTube channels that it's hard
There's
to
also
just jump on.
there's some unwritten etiquette as to how the people there treat each other.
Yeah.
And they all know each other. Pretty much they do. They have their little circles. So understanding that, so that when you contribute, you're doing something that's going to help the community and not tear it apart.
Right.
Or not come in there like the sore thumb. That's important to me, not because I'm such a conformist. Anybody who knows me well knows I'm totally not a conformist. But so you don't upset the apple cart and you don't destroy people who are having fun. So you don't come into a community and make waves in a way that's going to harm the people that are comfortable there.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree. Safina had a comment I wanted to highlight quick. Janny, just read your first book, Curse of the Mistwraith. It took me several attempts to read it. Once I read it, it was a great book. Thank you for a good series.
Well, thank you. It does take several attempts for some people to read that book because there's things in that book that they don't understand why they're there. Mm-hmm. Or they read something and they think they know why it's there and it's not going to do what they thought it was going to do. And so it takes a certain amount of letting go. Mm-hmm. And the people who go in there rigidly expecting it to do what they think it's going to do, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. Or if they read this and go, well, this should have been edited out, I don't even know why this was there, they have to just wait for it. Mm-hmm. Because the way this world fits together, it's not Earth. You are not in Kansas. It is not a European medieval fantasy. You might think it is. It might use certain of the words. It might wear some of the trappings, but your prejudice actually is overriding what's actually there. Mm-hmm. So this was done deliberately. Mm-hmm. I wanted a book that played games with your perspective, not in a bad way, played games. It's a character-driven story in a very intense world that is not Earth. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't blow all of the foundations out from under you all at once. So I kind of do it in stages as the characters figure it out. You will too. So people who think they understand what they're reading and insist on they understand what they're reading, they're going to bounce off. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sticking with it. If you got through book one, probably the rest of the series will be amazing. But I will be the first one to say, if you've got a controlling personality when you're reading,
let go.
Some people can't.
Right.
Some people don't want to be emotionally moved. Have you figured that out? Yeah. When you writers out there, that if you make them feel too hard, they're going to get really angry. And they totally don't want to feel, or they only have one range of emotions they want to feel and the rest are no way. No way. Don't want to feel that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you see it all the time in these people where they definitely don't mind being ground down, definitely don't mind being beat to death, tormented, miserable, but show them something beautiful and they can't handle it, or they forget it. They erase it off. What they remember from the book is not what was even there.
Right.
So the big series that I've written is its own piece of work, and either you're going to enjoy it or you're not going to be able to let go, and it totally won't work then. Mm-hmm. If you grip onto what you think you're reading too tight, you're going to lose your place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, like I was thinking about, because my next read from you is probably going to be Master of Whitstorm that you recommended to me. And I think sometimes when you're coming into reading an author that has a broader canon of work, spend a little bit of time, reading through some of the synopses and trying to decide where a good entry point for you as a reader is, because I think that's going to be different for everybody.
Depends on the author. If some authors do the same kind of thing over and over.
Sure.
If you want a comfortable read that is not going to surprise you and the author's going to do the same thing over and over, pick Eddings. Mm-hmm. Some authors, like me, I would get bored writing the same book over and over, so I radically write a different story, and sometimes even in a different style.
Yeah.
So you might hate Sorcerer's Legacy. Oh my God, it's got a female lead. Oh my gosh, there's a bit of romance in there. Oh my gosh. But that's not what I wrote when I did Master of Whitstorm. Mm-hmm. Not at all. So it depends on the author. Some authors tend to come at writing where they don't repeat themselves. Mm-hmm. Or repeat themselves very little.
Yeah.
Each book is its own entity. And other writers are very predictable that way.
Yeah.
So pick your read.
Out of curiosity, with Hell's Chasm, is there something that you would point to in that one where you came into writing that one that you felt, this is what I want to do different here, or something that was a new, I'm doing this different in that book?
I never expected to have to write the big series end to end to end. I always wanted to do standalones in between the major volumes because the big series was such an undertaking.
Oh, yeah.
Two things happened that forced the issue. One was the publisher wasn't having it. You had to keep writing the series. I encountered so much friction very early on with lack of support that it took a huge emotional toll. So just the stick-to-itiveness that it took to continue to craft this in the way it should be done. And the other thing that happened is people don't realize how many years I worked in that universe and worked with that series.
Right.
Before I even sold the first book. I had draft up to the end of Peril's Gate easily, beyond that. So when it came to the third arc, suddenly I had aging parent problems. I had all kinds of things that I had to handle on top of the draft was sketchier for those, even though I knew everything that had to be there. I was writing for more of a blank page for the latter books in the series. So part of the problem was lack of support. My original editor said, don't tell me what happens in this series at all. I don't want to know the overview. I just want to read the books and know nothing. And that created a problem because entering arc 3, where you lift to worldview, book 4, Fugitive Princess, book 4, if you're going by the paperbacks the way they were split, people think it sprawls, and it's not doing that. It's stage setting for going to worldview, where now you're going to know where all the factions are coming from. Before, you thought you knew what they were, but you did not know their moral high ground. You did not know what their purpose was. And it's delivered explosively in arc 4, in stages. So I had an editor who had no clue what was coming. The only person who knew what was coming was me.
Right.
And I was going against time in that there were other series at the time coming out where book 4 was where they hit their sprawlies. So the general public was going, oh, yep, all the series fall off the edge on book 4. The sprawlies hit. They no longer are quote edited. They no longer have control of the material. They no longer know what they're doing. They're never going to finish that one too. So I hit that, and really the tipping point for the series where the lid really blows off and I really start digging into the deeper underpinnings is Peril's Gate. And you have no idea at Peril's Gate where it's going to end up when you hit Song of the Mysteries, because the layers get so deep after that. There wasn't even language to express it in the early books. And yet when you read those books and you go back to book 1, you will see it's all there. Your own prejudices kept you from seeing, because it is all there. So I was working this tremendously intricate work with years and decades of work behind it, knowing exactly what I was doing, where public sentiment was against me. The publisher had no clue what was coming. My career was falling apart in the US. All support had been ripped apart, gone. Editors had left. I was in the hands of people that marketing departments were failing. The whole publishing industry was changing at the end of the 90s. So the pressure against what I was trying to do, a long form work on the slippery slope of publishing is changing faster than people can even parse what is happening. There's a major piece of dynamite falling on the tracks every year as far as how major publishing works. Every year. And then here comes this, here comes 2000s, here comes the internet, here comes the big chains, here comes this folding, here comes Amazon, here comes algorithm, here comes. So when it came to Hell's Chasm, I had just finished Peril's Gate. If you've read Peril's Gate, it is an emotional ringer. I was exhausted.
I bet.
Emotionally, fighting the current and the trend, fighting the fact that I was writing the series that almost nobody knew was there, fighting the fact that I had no publisher at the time for the following volumes. Everything was a mess. So I said, you know what? I just need to take a break and write a standalone that I can do start to finish. Not just because I need the break, but also because this will shut the naysayers up, that Wurts can't control a book. I wrote a 5.5-day plot, start to finish, with an entire world, an entire magic, entire characters, whole thing, start to finish in 5.5 days.
Yeah.
So it's very, very compact.
Yep.
So that was supposed to be the book that won me another place in the U.S., get me another U.S. publisher, because everything had fallen apart in a merger and I had no home in the U.S. Didn't happen because 9/11 happened exactly the same time. So that buried that book. It buried it. So it was an emotional let off steam because I wanted a break.
Yeah.
I needed a creative break. I was tired of hearing the wave of public sentiment that wasn't any of my doing. I wasn't the author not finishing. I wasn't the author that was sprawling. I wasn't the author that didn't have control of the material. I can show you the outlines in the spreadsheets that shows there's a certain amount of freewheeling creativity that went into this, but there's also a great deal of I know exactly what I'm doing.
Right.
From day one.
Yeah.
I know exactly what I'm doing here. So Hell's Chasm was sort of my way to satisfy myself. And if the naysayers read it and change their minds, fine. If they don't, I don't care. But it was an I don't care kind of a read. And
Yeah.
I hope to do more books like that. Not no sequel to that. It's a standalone, but standalones completely starting from brass tacks and building it up from nothing. I love to do that. Not for me, the Cosmere where you attach and connect everything, or C.J. Cherry's Union Alliance, which was the Cosmere before the Cosmere existed.
I'm excited to get into some of her work.
Oh, she's a phenomenal writer, just an amazing writer, but you really need to be able to handle the psychological impact of her work because she's a psychological writer. There's nobody better for taking mass crowd hysterica and throwing psychological impacts on top of them. In Crisis, she's brilliant. She's brilliant. And I'm losing people that I think are brilliant every day. Somebody's dying right now. It'll be a sad day when I don't have a new Cherry book to read. So please keep writing. Keep writing. But yeah, she's brilliant. And she's too often underread now because honestly, she was doing The Expanse before The Expanse. If you like The Expanse, you would love her Alliance Union. Amazing stuff. So there you go. Every book is done for a different reason for me. Some of them are fluff reads. You want a fluff read, read Sorcerer's Legacy. You want only a couple of characters and an episodic read Master of Whitstorm. They're all different.
Yeah.
And the big series is absolutely hurling you off the deep end. That one is not going to hold your hand.
Yeah. That's the fun part about being a writer, though, is that, we have the freedom to tell the story we want to tell, and we don't have to keep ourselves in a box all the time, which is lovely. At least from obviously when you're working with a traditional publisher, you have certain, things that you have to hit and follow, but
no, you don't.
To some degree.
No, you don't. Either you take it or you leave it. You just have to keep your guts. Sure. You have to carry your guts in your hand. You have to have brass balls in a wheelbarrow. Okay? Because doing your own thing while you're dragging all that behind you means that you're going to shift gears and the people that you were working with might not want to work with you again.
Right.
I had an editor totally devoted with me when I wrote Cycle of Fire because that editor liked nautical fantasy. And trust me, I've done offshore sailing. This is a real nautical fantasy. I didn't write it from the armchair. Totally not. But it's never listed as a nautical fantasy.
Right.
But then when I went on and did something else and it wasn't nautical, that editor just didn't want anything to do with what I was writing. Off they go. So no, not every editor. If you're going to really tackle your career as a maverick writer that's going to do what you're called to do, sometimes you have to let go of your past and walk through another door, whatever that door may be. And it's always like stepping off the high dive. Is there going to be water underneath of you or a very hard landing? And you never, ever know.
Right.
So either you take the lead in your career or you let the edges be sanded off by public opinion, by whatever the publisher niches you as, by whatever, how many people have tried to niche me as the Empire co-writer? Sorry, but most of the people who read my work have niched me as the Empire co-writer. And either they didn't even try my solo work or they did and it wasn't Empire, so bye-bye. Even if they entered at the wrong point, because there might have been a point in my career where it would have worked. So are you going to let that stop you? Or are you going to step off the deep end? Here's the big one. Name me a writer in the 80s that copied Tolkien that was a woman. Now, name me a male writer who made their start in the 80s who did not rip a big page out of Tolkien. Now name me all the popular books that have survived that weren't Le Guin. Surprise. You either follow the marble down the chute of what is selling today, if you can keep up with it, because things are moving too fast right now. You probably can't. But the women did not write that. And look, they're incredibly original work done then that would fit in today's demands, today's market. Right now, gay fiction, inclusive fiction, experimental fiction, fiction that you couldn't predict, fiction that was not Tolkien. It's everywhere. Steampunk, before steampunk was a thing. Steampunk was written, urban fantasy, before urban fantasy was a thing. Emma Bull, go read her War for the Oaks. Go read Teresa Edgerson's Goblin Moon. She wrote steampunk before it was a thing. Or Gnome's Engine. Yeah, it was Gnome's Engine was the first one. So those books are disappeared because people go, oh, 80s fantasy, it's dated. No, it wasn't. Only if you picked the stuff that was selling in the mega numbers. But show me the woman that's entered the field doing a Tolkien imitation, and I haven't found her. She doesn't exist. And I've read pretty widely. I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
But the women were not writing that then. And not all of the male writers were either. I can name you dozens of really solid books, but they were not what sold the big numbers, and they were not what the publisher put the big money behind or the big advances. So, surprise. Grimdark existed before the Game of Thrones. Big time. So step up, people. Don't niche everybody's writing. Don't niche a time period. Don't niche an age bracket. Don't niche anything. Don't say people over X age are writing that old stuff anymore, because those people are still alive that were writing in the 80s and 90s. They're still writing, and they're writing really good stuff. But a lot of them are discouraged and not talked about. And that's too bad. So I will fight that trend to my dying tooth and nail breath.
Well, I mean, honestly, in my own kind of delve into, the older fantasy novels for my generation, older fantasy novels, I'm barely dipping my toes in, and I'm already blown away by what I'm finding. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the Cosmic Footsteps book club thing this year, because it was like, why are we not talking about these? Because these are like, you guys would love these. Why are we not talking about it?
You just read your first Juliet Marillier book.
I did, and I loved
it. She writes wonderful books.
Yeah.
And they center women in a way that these are not strapping warrior women. They're women.
Yeah.
She's an incredible writer. But look at what the copyright date of what you just read, Daughter of the Forest.
99.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were other women doing books like that.
Right. Before that.
Yep. But they have been erased.
Right.
So I'm not so much angry about it as it's tragic.
Yeah.
Because what was selling in huge whacking numbers then is considered old fantasy and lumped in, and it's not being read.
Right. Well, and I really appreciate that list, because I had asked you on Twitter a while back for a list of just, all right, like what are the names that I should be looking at? And I'm really excited to kind of slowly work my way through a bunch of them. I know after I finished Daughter of the Forest, I went and I bought like 3 or 4 other books of Juliet's, because I was like, man, like this is beautiful. And we talk about all the time now in like modern fantasy, that blending between fairy tale and fantasy and historical kind of settings. And she just weaves all that in so brilliantly to these really emotionally compelling stories.
She blended Norse and Celtic together in her Fox Mask, and it's brilliantly done. And I liked her historical depiction of Norse culture and that blend of, the Northern Islands where the Northern Celtic and the Norse kind of crosses over and blends, because totally. She really captured that. It's a duology. It's one of my favorites that she did. It's really well done. So yeah, she should be a much bigger name than she is. So many of these writers should be.
Yeah.
And could be. But people don't know they're there, and the internet hasn't really discovered them, because anything pre 2000 something isn't even rated and reviewed enough, because people didn't put those books on the internet, and you had to find them in paper.
Right.
Ebooks didn't exist.
Right.
And the sad thing is, they go, oh, well, I go into the charity book shops and I look and I find, and I'll tell you this, you can't parse a time period from a charity shop, because two things are going to crop on the shelves. One is going to be the books that had massive press runs and are already not forgotten. You're going to find a gabillion copies of the same old stuff. Or you're going to find books that really aren't that great, because they weren't keepers. The keepers, the cream of the crop, did not appear in the charity shops for a long period. Now they might be, because the people who are keeping them probably are dying. Sad as it sounds.
Yeah.
But even so, the press runs for some of those mid-list books that those women wrote were very, very small. And so your odds of encountering these books on a charity shop shelf, unless you know what you're looking for, is going to be very, very low. You're going to have to really dig hard to find, like, The Marrow Tree by Katie Wakeman. And that's like, holy crap. That's an amazing, amazing book about cultural appropriation that would just totally blow your mind. But hardly any copies were printed. And it had a huge spotlight when it was printed. It was considered going to be a literary masterpiece hit, but it just sort of didn't take. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And she disappeared. She wrote like one other book, and that's it. We lost a genius.
Yeah.
But that book is well worth digging up. And I can list you, quite a few titles that are hard to find, but are worth the read, not just by women.
Yeah.
Go read Jeff Salyer's Blood Sounder's Ark. Brilliant trilogy. It was like a flash in the pan. It was talked about for a year or two, and now it's just disappeared. And my husband and I both loved that book.
Yeah. We'll have to do just an entire chat of book recommendations, and everybody can put their notebooks.
Will destroy your TBR mountain. And I could have you reading the cream of the crop of everything that I've found in the last decades, and it would completely shut you off from reading new stuff for probably 10 years. And the new writers would hate me for it. But ideally they would have to compete with that.
Yep. There have been a couple of comments in the chat recommending, have you heard of Manda Scott's Boudica?
I have heard of it. That's not one that I happen to have read yet.
Yeah.
But I've definitely heard of it for sure.
There are several people that have mentioned that as asking if you've read it.
Not yet. It's on my radar. But you realize that they're going to have to go head and head with, like, Dorothy Dunnett. With, like, there's some amazing historical stuff that's been done. And you'd have to go far to topple that one off the perch. Yep. There are people that said of her work, the historians say, you can read the novels and not have to read the history, because she wove smaller characters into the main events so well.
Yeah. And
her research was so deep and so wide, and she was a genius, and her prose style is very, very thick. Most people can't handle it, but the people that get it. So yeah, I've read a lot of historical work, and I love it. So I will be reading, but sometimes the modern historical it just can't compete with that. The richness. And again, I read the library, and I don't like the pared down, oversimplified style. I can read a story that way, and I can absolutely appreciate the story, and often I'll love the book. But that's not what really warms my heart. I like to see language used like a weapon. where it's so precise it pierces you, where the right word in the right place, in the right syntax, in the right beat, in the right meter can just tear you apart. And I feel we're losing the juice of language. You know, what was it, a Twitter comment today where somebody listed a bunch of cool words and somebody comes on and says cattywampus. What does that even mean? I never heard of it. And that is such a cool word.
It's a great word.
So we're losing the wealth of the tool chest.
Yeah.
It's like all screwdrivers are not alike.
Right.
You don't, you know, and so there was a precision tool chest, and I'm watching that be eroded away. And I find that very sad.
Yeah. I think that was one of the, I think, things that I appreciate about having grown up in a very rural setting here, because a lot of that, there was just more of a, and especially the benefit of growing up in a very literary family that read a lot, is a lot of those kind of words have just been in my hearing since I was tiny, and I grew up with that.
You don't have to look that far. Look at the language in Harry
Right.
Potter.
Yeah.
Now, if you get the US edition, they dumbed it down a bit.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, they didn't think that
Yeah.
people could understand what a philosopher's stone was. So, okay, we had to change the title. But I'm just saying that it's being eroded away at a very rapid rate, and there are a lot of writers that I see coming on who are cheering this on.
Yeah.
We got to have the transparent prose. And it's like, I'm not saying that's wrong. There's plenty of times when I'm tired and I want to read a story where I don't have to concentrate, and I love fluff stories. I love frivolous stories. I love stories that don't have any depth because I don't want to be tried today. I got tried by my life enough, right? So I don't feel that those stories are bad, wrong, or shouldn't be there.
Right.
They definitely have their place. But I do mourn the loss. We're squeezing the juice out of language. We are losing it. At a ferocious rate, to the point where we actually have readers that will complain when they have a phone at their fingertips and they could look it up like that, where I would have to go get a reference book.
Right.
Or learn it like I learned it, read it from context. That's how you learn language, is context. That's how you learn the nuance of the different meanings, where the first meaning, the second meaning, the third meaning, the fourth meaning. To the point where my copy editor said, yeah, I needed the Oxford English Dictionary unabridged. Every time I thought you used that word wrong, I'd go and I'd look it up, and damn it, it was there. I wasn't trying. Look, I wasn't trying to do that. I wasn't trying. The word was just there, and it was like a hitting the bullseye with a dart. It was exactly the word, with exactly the overtone, with exactly, there's sometimes you want an Anglo-Saxon word, because that's the tone that you're writing. And there's sometimes when you want a Latinate word, because that's the tone you're striking. So it's like, do you want a piano with 10 notes, or do you want the whole scale? You know, the whole grand piano with all of the notes.
Well,
I want all of the notes.
There's such a thrill that comes with writing a sentence and sitting on it for a minute and then finding the word like that, you know, and putting it in there, and it just falls into place, and it sounds, you read it out loud to yourself, and it just makes you happy. There's a thrill there that I really enjoy when I get to those sentences where I find the right word, and I have to sit on it for a little bit.
Or you just don't worry about it until you come through on your rewrites.
For sure.
Yeah. But I guess I'll be really glad I'm dead if that's where we're headed.
Please keep writing, Janny.
This was from a reader's standpoint.
Yeah.
If it comes to the point where comprehension is so eroded that half the vocabulary that we're using, and people are saying, oh, she can't write without a thesaurus. Really? Really? I mean, come on, people.
Yeah.
You have a brain here. So, you know, yes, I've spent a lot of my time reading. I've spent a lot of my time outdoors. I've spent a lot of my time offshore in sailboats. I spent a lot of my time doing a whole bunch of other things than just writing books. Yeah. That's why I've only got 20 novels and one short story collection out there, and 36 shorts separate. I don't have 80 books at this age because I did everything else too.
Right.
Plus the artwork. But don't squeeze me down to where suddenly everything is monotonous.
Right.
as in monotone, one note, one finger piano, monotonous.
Yep.
So this huge trend of reducing good writing to whether the comprehension level is for the, I don't know, I don't want to sound, because like I said, those books have their place.
Yep.
But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's
Mm-hmm.
not be afraid to use our phone to look something up. Let's
Right.
not be afraid to have a new idea or a new word or a new thought or a new. Read the letters that the soldiers in the Civil War, the common soldier, wrote home to their parents. And
Yep.
the vocabulary in those letters will absolutely floor
Blow
you
your mind. Yep.
how much we've lost already.
Yeah. My grandfather and my grandpa and grandma wrote. Our family has about 200 letters that my triple great grandfather wrote home during the Civil War, and my grandfather and grandmother turned those 200 letters into a book detailing the life of a common soldier in the Minnesota First Regiment through all the time that he was in the war. And yeah, it was so cool too, because it was cool to see his writing, because it showed me he loved writing. Like, he wrote so much in his journals, in his letters, and the way that he, wrote about things and described things. It was such a cool heritage moment for me to see that there's this writer, this love of writing coming through all of these generations. And that's such a special, I think, privilege.
Was it
that
love
I
of
had.
writing, or that was the way he connected to people?
Probably a
That's
little
the
bit of
way
both.
he expressed himself.
Yeah.
I mean, now we blow it all off on TikTok.
Well, I don't, not me.
Not me, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like the clever post and then it's gone.
Yeah.
But so the way we communicate is totally changed. And in some ways it's richer. We're more visually oriented than we've ever been because of
Yep.
growing up with TV and movies.
Yep.
So visual comprehension has gone leaps and bounds. What they had to describe using words, now we can do it with pictures. And if I would be willing to bet you showed some of those people pictures back then, they wouldn't grasp them the same way we can now.
Right.
Because we've expanded our brains in different directions.
Right.
But yeah, the language in some of those, did the language floor you when you read those? It's like, wow, boy, they really had a lot of interesting ways of expression to choose from.
Yeah. Somebody in the comments also wanted to know if you had read, and I can't find it now, but wanted to know if you had read R. Scott Baker.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I know that is going to be a really brutally grim journey.
That's what
and I
heard.
know that it delves into psychological depths that are well worth the ride, much same way of Ricardo Pinto's work, The Stone Dance of the Chameleon. That thing in the third volume goes to some very, very brutal places.
Mm.
The reason why I'm holding back on Scott Baker is I want to choose my moment when I can handle it.
Right.
Because I don't want to put myself in a position where I wish I had brain bleach. And what you have to understand about me is I live a little closer to life than some writers do.
Mm-hmm.
I've done 10 years in search and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a lot of work with law enforcement and recovery after disasters, recovery after cold cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't go into specifics about any one case. But let me say that the reality of what human beings can do to each other
Mm-hmm.
is not entertainment.
No.
So I'm aware that if I read Scott Baker, it's going to hit me on a whole other level.
Right.
Just like my friend who was a fireman and first responder, fire captain, there's certain kinds of movies he can't watch.
Yeah.
Because this is not entertainment to him. So
it's real. Yeah.
I definitely understand it's a worthwhile read. I definitely understand that the people who've read it love it for the depths and for the perspectives and for the philosophical angles that those books explore.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, while I'm still working with certain things in my real life, this is not time to read that book.
Right.
So, no, I have not read that one yet. I'm not going to shy away from books that get really dark. I've read plenty of dark stuff, but that particular one, I'm just going to handle it when I'm prepared and when I'm not immersed in seeing the actual.
Right.
I mean, we went across to the Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's one thing to watch stuff on the Weather Channel in your nice little sofa. It's quite another to walk through the wreckage of people's lives.
Yeah.
And seeing what happens. And I truly believe that evil people don't believe they're evil. And I don't believe in evil anyway. I just believe in intelligence that doesn't believe in itself. In other words, we're given consciousness, we're given intelligence. But if we don't believe that we're capable of solving a problem or clearing a burden of grief or a burden of self-hate or whatever, if we don't believe in ourselves, we can never climb out of that pit. And then we do things as humanity that can be terrible. So not believing that consciousness equips you to find another way through for whatever reason, whether you were taught that, whether the door was slammed in your face, whether you were abused, it's up to us to unwind our misfortunes and try to find a way out. And some people don't ever.
Yep.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that's not entertainment for me. So I know that won't be an entertainment read. It'll be a different level altogether. And not all reading is entertainment.
Yeah.
So it's okay for people who want to explore that aspect of their mind. It's a safe way to do it. Be my guest. Go read those books. But Scott Baker, I'm going to wait my moment. I hope I've explained myself.
Oh, absolutely. I feel there. I think that's a really important thing, to know yourself as a reader well enough to be willing to challenge yourself and to read books outside your comfort zone, but also know what those limitations are, and knowing when to read a book and when
Let
to
me
let
just
it lie.
say that when you go and you work with a really ugly recovery case where the family's not got closure for decades,
Right.
and what the details of the event are not pretty.
Yeah.
And you're helping them try to get closure because you're helping them find the one piece of evidence that will open that case up and get it solved, or make the whole thing make sense, or give them something, because not knowing anything, when you know something truly ugly happened, again, I'm not going to go into details. If you can work on a case like that for 1 day or 3 days, and then come home and just be PTSD for a month, because you can't help but become emotionally wrecked by what happened.
Right.
And by pitching in and volunteering and trying to help the situation. So what's a book going to do when you see the real impact of a real life torn apart by something? What is a book going to do? So I guess what I would say is it's like taking a trauma person and saying, here, go read a horror book. I won't read horror books often because I don't enjoy being afraid. And I get flack from that on my husband all the time, because it's like, why don't I love horror movies? Why don't I love Stephen King's horror books? Stephen King is a brilliant writer. And I say this over and over. He's a good storyteller. There's nothing the matter with the way he writes. It's that I don't enjoy being scared.
Yeah.
This isn't fun.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had the same thing where I've had people try to get me to watch horror films and everything else. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, guys, but this just isn't for me. I don't enjoy the experience of this. So yeah, I completely understand that. Anitha says, I can relate to this so much.
And it's not that I won't read a horror book or won't watch a horror movie. I will. Occasionally I will. But I know I'm going to have nightmares about it for a week. And I know it's going to tear me up emotionally. And I know that it's going to hit me on a visceral level, that I don't enjoy being scared.
Right.
So I don't enjoy being dragged through the muck of what human beings can do to each other, because the reality is sometimes so much worse.
Right. Yeah.
So much worse. So this is not taking away in any way the merit of a literary work like Scott Baker.
Right. Yeah. Do you think, we talk often about fantasy being, I hesitate using like a word like a safe genre, because that kind of isn't the word that I'm looking for, but a place where we can more easily maybe express some of the harder things in the world, and trying to explore how we feel about it, and kind of process through that.
That is a tough question because there's so many layers to it.
Mm-hmm.
The easy layer is, I was reading a piece written by a librarian today that I stumbled across on a Twitter feed, where librarians and parents were arguing with school boards, saying that books shouldn't be taken off the shelves, even when they're controversial, even when they run against certain people's belief systems, because it enabled the children to have difficult discussions with the parents that on topics that you wouldn't just bring up out of the blue, or you wouldn't introduce your kids. In other words, it opened a door to start the kid thinking about what this difficult subject could mean. It started the roots of critical thinking. And it enabled the parents to participate with that critical thinking and the shaping of it, which to some of these parents who want to protect their kids from everything is important for them to do. So instead of denying what's out there, open the door to bring it into parental discussion. And okay, then they can pursue their beliefs and whatever, but at least the door's not closed.
Right.
You don't get bitten by the stuff in the closet that's let out the door. You get bitten by the stuff that's locked in, and that's the stuff that's, is it a way to explore that stuff? That can have so many different meanings. Are you exploring it because you want to indulge in the taboo?
Right.
That can be valid. Are you doing it because you're curious? Are you doing it because you're in a mood to see something ghoulish? We want to stare at an accident. There's human nature. Somebody gets killed and you want to, just for survival's sake, you're driven to see how did they do it so I don't do that too, right?
Right.
So there's so many layers to how you can access something in a book. How can you simplify it to, is this a good thing or a bad thing, or do I think it's a valid way to explore? It's always a valid way to explore, because frankly, consciousness is going to go there. If it doesn't actually do it, it might read about it, or it might think about it. I mean, we all have grim thoughts. We all explore grim subjects. This is what our minds are for. What does this mean? And how does it relate to the rest of my experience? How does it relate to my community? So I think you can't close that box. If you do, you've denied a facet of your very curious, explorative side of your human nature. And when we get a mess with there's dictators or there's freedoms being taken away, it's because people don't want to think. Thinking isn't dangerous. It's when we aren't allowed to think. And then it becomes dangerous, because the natural boundarylessness of your mind is going to rebel.
Right.
And who decides where those boundaries are? And why are they deciding that there? And it almost always comes down to, what the heck are you afraid of? And if you're afraid of it, do I have to be afraid of it too?
Right.
So I'm not a real fan of shutting down. I'm a fan of opening things up. And even if they look bad, or if they're terrifying, or if they're looking at ugly situations, don't not look, but look at them with the humility of understanding that no matter what you think about what you're seeing, you don't know everything to know everything there is about it.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people popping off opinions where they absolutely don't know enough to be even having an opinion at all, except for, this makes my heart bleed to look at.
Right. Yep. And I think sometimes people try to, a lot of people want to have an opinion that makes them look like they, have an awareness of what's going on. And sometimes I think they can jump in to a point where they put out an opinion that they're trying to overcomplicate something that they'd be better served to do exactly that, and to just,
how much of it is fear? I don't want that ever to happen to me, so I better tell everybody else what to do when it's happening to them. But, I guess I've said it before, when I step onto a new platform, I just woke up my account at Blue Sky and I said right off the bat, guys, don't come to me for opinions on world events. I'm not going to post that stuff here.
Yep.
I am not posting that stuff here. When I see a world event, I am going to do something about it. And that is between me and my private opinion. That's not for the public.
Right.
So all this shouting on the internet to change people's minds, or shouting in a book to change people's minds, that's not going to change people's minds. Experience and being open and talking to each other changes people's minds. But I see a lot of one-way shouting and not a lot of talking.
Yeah.
And that goes with books too. So I like books. You've read one of my works. I really like coming at a subject from many different angles, where from the angle the character is coming from, they're not wrong. They have their reasons for acting the way they do.
Yep.
And they can change, or they don't change and they dig in and they destroy themselves.
Right. Yeah. And I know for me, like in writing, in exploring experiences from my own life, it is, if I were to just sit down and journal verbatim a scenario, I have a hard time with that still. Whereas when I move to one of my books, it is easier for me to explore my own mind on those topics in that fantastic world with these characters. And that's like an easier place for me to dig into that.
I see a lot of people making the big, broad statement, science fiction's about the future and fantasy is about the past. And I hate that statement.
Yeah.
I would turn that over and say that fantasy is about the language of dreams, and the language of dreams is about the myth that you are living. And the myth is what underlies your beliefs. Your beliefs are built of myths, and fantasy handles those myths barehanded. So it's about why we behave the way we do and what we believe about what we do. And it's about the myth that underlies our society. If you rip apart the myth that holds the society together, new beliefs and other things are going to come up. So we're raised to certain absolutes of this is what we believe because this is the civilized way to behave. This is this. It's all about the myth, the mythscape of what shapes how we respond to our lives and our social fabric.
Right.
So fantasy is all about exploring the mythscape that underlies the beliefs. And science fiction can do that too. So I don't see the cut and dried line of fantasy is the past. No, it isn't. It's very much about the present. It's about why do we believe what we do. You wrote in your Bloodstones 2 different societies that are about to come to a header. And they run on 2 very different philosophical bases. The closed fist and the open hand, and the other one that pretends to be so civilized but is so tearing itself apart with knives and infighting and lies and appearances and power and ambition, all wrapped up in beautiful silk-clad culture. And all wrapped up in family obligations, and here's what you're expected to be, and here's what you're expected to do. The 2 mythscapes underlying those cultures are quite different.
Yeah.
And when they come into a head-on, you're going to get a mess.
Yep.
Because what's causing one culture to behave and react one way, and what's causing another culture to behave and react another way. And then you got these kids that were shaped to be weapons in a very horrible, very ugly way.
Yep.
In the middle of this, they were dehumanized to the point where which way are they going to turn and what's going to happen? And they were dehumanized to the point where they killed their own peers. And they'll kill a stranger without compunction. They'll kill over a cookie. They'll kill over a minor infraction of a rule.
Right.
So what mythscape are they living off of, and how have they been preconditioned or conditioned to react? And what happens when that conditioning starts to break down?
Right.
I don't know where you're going to take this, but I mean, this is the dynamic forces that I see you building in your fantasy. And correct me if I'm wrong. Did I get it wrong?
No.
epic fantasy in yours is a turning point where society is about to change and change radically.
Yeah.
And it's all to do with a clash of mythscapes. And what is any cultural misunderstanding anyway? But mythscapes that don't agree. And I was doing artwork at one point for a documentary film called Imaginal Realms, which was about if we understood their stories, we wouldn't have wars. Because stories describe the mythscape of the society that they originate from. And we either can relate to it or we can't because it's too alien. The mythscape is too alien. Or some of those stories they were pulling up in that documentary were 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
And they still applied.
Right.
So I think that fantasy is the language of dreams, and it's handling the mythscape barehanded, fearlessly, with the gloves off, and saying, what if we manipulate this a bit? Or what if we throw something new into the mix? Or what happens to belief systems when they break down?
Right.
What happens to belief systems when they're put under pressure and they fray?
Yeah.
What happened to belief systems when the perspective to understand why they're there breaks down completely and you have to completely step off and take another stance that may be 180 from where you were before?
Right.
So, but I've always looked at what fantasy is differently than most people. I don't like oversimplifying things.
Yeah. Yeah.
The literary world, the writing world, the world of our consciousness is a whole lot messier than people want to make out. They all want to box it up neat and put a bow around it. And I'm going to fight that.
Yeah. I think we need more of that, honestly. And not just in fantasy, but in general.
Oh, yeah. But you know what happens? You get a tsunami of haters when you do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we already talked about Thomas Covenant. We can talk about some more that do it. Baker's another one. I mean, you know, I have my reasons for avoiding Baker. Hating what he's doing isn't about it. It's more about where the intersect of my real life might impact that. And I don't want to step into something I can't wipe off too easily and walk away from. But I will come to a point where I do read that series, most likely at some point when I'm ready for it. But yeah, taking chances like that, when you start messing with people's belief systems, it can backlash and bang pretty hard. I mean, let's talk about P.L. Stewart again. He took a lot of people's very cherished belief systems and a lot of their very rigid thinking about what this should be and what that should be and what racism is and what turned it all on its ear. And the number of people who absolutely cannot handle seeing the graphic mirror image of what they live every day that they don't pay attention to. Boy, does he get flack for that. Yeah. And the courage it took him and the masterful way he delivered. When he wants to hit you between the eyes with a truth, he doesn't flinch. And he gives you just enough fantasy enjoyment of his big broad scale battles and the love of, you know, the Conan-like shedding of blood. He's good at writing the battle scene. He gives you just enough comfort spots where he doesn't hit you in the eyes with certain things.
Yeah.
He allows you to keep your mythscape intact. But he'll shatter the glass in startling ways. And, you know, a lot of people cannot take that.
Right.
And I'm like, get your guts together, read this book. And then make a little notepad next to you and write down exactly what happened on all the pages that you hated. Now look at that landscape. What was the mythscape that you rebelled against to here? What was threatened here? What broke? Because you can learn a lot from a book under a writer like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, and when I read your book, Phased, the same thing, the whole high school dynamic of what the peer group is doing to the outliers. Those of us, a lot of us who are creative, we lived that. Yep. We know exactly how that felt. You captured that very, very well.
Thank you.
So a book like that would help a person that's struggling with that, I would think, if you read it at that age where you're the outlier and you're trying very hard to find your place in the world, but the peer group just ain't having it.
Right.
And no matter what you do, The peer group just ain't having it. And somehow there's a piece of sand in you that just says, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sand everything off and pretend to be what I'm not.
Right.
And how many kids do that?
Yep.
They sand it all off, pretend to be what they're not. And so you took that bull by the horns in your book Phased, and you put it on the page very brutally and very graphically. And you did it in a way that most high school kids will never see that degree of violence. But, you know, you were writing a fantasy.
Right.
But you made your point.
Yeah.
The underlying point, the miscape you were writing about underneath of that is very well handled, and it's graphically done.
Thank you. I think in a lot of ways, I was writing to the kid that I was at that age, and the other kids that, you know, will pick up this book and know what it feels like to be, because it's always so funny, because like we were talking about the perceptions that readers may have when they first start into a story and they think they know this, what it's about. And in a simplified way, like a lot of people have come into Phase and, oh, it's a book about werewolves. But it's not. That's the vehicle through which I'm telling a much deeper story. And I'm always very grateful when people say that they were surprised by what they found in the story. And that's always a compliment to me, when they go in expecting one thing and come out realizing it's something completely different. Yeah.
So yeah, there's power in storytelling.
Yeah. And a lot of it.
Too much of society runs around saying it's a frivolous pastime. But when power decides to take over and take control, what is the first thing they eliminate? It's the storytellers, whether they're retelling the truth or retelling the myth. Doesn't matter. First to go. Yep. As Ursula Le Guin said, go out there and be dangerous. There's a reason why telling stories is dangerous.
Yep. But it's important not to shy away from it if you can. Derry wanted to know, what is the best way to get a letter to Janny? Obviously, I don't want an actual address, but what's the best way to contact
My website has a contact page, and my email is very, very public. You can write my email. There's also a mailing address listed on that contact page. It's a post office box. You can send it there if you'd rather write it. Won't be picked up immediately quickly because we pick that up on air and day. But I'm one of the easiest writers to get a hold of on the internet.
Well, and also for anybody who's in the chat right now or anybody watching the replay, if you go down in my description box below the video, there is a link to Janny's website right in the description, so that you can go and either check out the contact page, or there's a huge list of all of Janny's books on there if you're new to her work. And Janny, I just wanted to say thank you again for spending your time on my channel again, and for all of the insight that you always share. I always know I'm going to come out of these conversations with a lot to think about, so I really appreciate that.
Well, I think you deserve a medal because you handled raising kids and pursuing your creativity. That is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So a lot of writers have to wrestle handling the home front and writing, and often they don't get the credit they deserve for it. So
thank you. I really
cheers for you, and your kids will grow up the better for it. I
hope so. They're definitely going to grow up in a literary household. If I have anything to say about it. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for hanging out with us and for all of your awesome questions and comments. I hope you all are having a fabulous rest of your evening, and that you read books that make you think. And we will see you guys in the next video.
Okay, bye, I'll add one thing, that if they put a comment in the chat and they did not see it answered, they're perfectly free to pop it on the Twitter feed or whatever.
Awesome. Lots of appreciation for you in the chat right now, Janny.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Tori. It's always a privilege.
Thank you for coming on. It's an honor to host you. So we will I'm sure this will not be our last conversation, and I look forward to our next Twitter chat as well.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.